Collaboration, collaboration, the magic of audience cross-pollination. You've been preaching to your choir, here's the magic multiplier to help you grow your congregation. Hello, friend. Thanks for pressing play on this episode. We are in the middle of our All the Things You Need to Deliver Your Dynamic Message series. I'm Jen Eads, the head broad in charge at the Brassy Broadcasting Company, and here at the big table with me is
Alex Perry from Practically Speaking.
And Alex, what are we talking about in this episode?
Today, we're talking about bad behavior.
One of my favorite topics.
Bad stuff.
And how to handle bad behavior, whether in the podcasting realm or in the speaking and presentation realm.
What do you do when things go off the rails?
Oh, yeah.
What does it look like in the podcasting world for someone to, what are the bad behaviors that people have?
People that come on the show and they're selling right off the bat. Buy my book, buy my course, buy my blah, 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 before they are even giving any insight, any tips, anything of value. They are just buy my stuff. And that's kind of a turnoff for me.
Sort of the I'm so great, I'm so fabulous, that.
Yeah. Oh God, I hate that. I just hate that. How do you avoid that?
Oh, the I behavior?
Yes.
So that happens in speaking too,
Okay.
especially when people feel that they need to establish credibility, despite the fact that they likely already have it because they're talking.
Right.
So if you're up on that stage or if you're invited to a podcast, you're there because you have that established credibility. So what I like to do with the I behavior, depending on whether or not it's a client, and it might be different in the podcasting world, so I might separate these out a little bit. With a client, I might say to them, all right, I hear a lot of the word I. Let's shift that to, let's talk about we, let's talk about us. Let's give examples that are maybe not your own personal examples, but they are examples that are of the people that you work with, clients, friends. And that will help negate that I talking. In your world, you may not have that much time. So redirecting the person, tell me about one of your clients, or tell me about how your process works to create the thingamajig. That generally helps with that self-focused sort of behavior. Sometimes you might have to challenge it directly and say, I hear you saying I a lot. Let's talk about, let's see if we can shift that away. And just a gentle, subtle reminder. Someone may not realize that they're doing it.
How can you, like, as you prepare to be a guest on a podcast or to go, speak or present, how can you become aware, like more self-aware of the I syndrome?
Recordings are a great tool.
Yes.
So record yourself practicing your talk, record yourself answering the questions to the podcast you're getting ready to be a part of. Ask someone to listen to you and give you honest feedback, especially if it's someone that you trust. You can say specifically, I want you to listen for these three things. I want you to listen to see how many fillers I use. I want you to listen and see how often I say the word I want you to listen and see if I'm doing anything weird, or watch and see if I'm doing anything weird that I'm not aware of. And those things are really helpful. I think you said something, though, that really bears a little bit of conversation, and that is, how do we prepare people to either talk or be to talk? How do we prepare people to be on a podcast, and how do we do that well? I know how I prepare speakers to get on stage, but is there a difference between how we prepare people for a podcast?
I think one of the things that's key in guest preparation is,
well, let's take a step back.
Okay.
Do podcasters know to prepare their guests?
After they get burned a couple of times, they learn the lesson the hard way. There are some that go into it, depending on what their background and experience is. Some people are like, oh yeah, I should probably tell my guest how they can be successful. So it's a win-win for everyone. But then, there are people that hey, I want a podcast. They're just starting out. they have a great interview with a guest, but there's some horrible background noise, or they're excited because they think they're going to have a great interview with the guest, but there's been, some kind of missed communication somewhere along the way, and it's just a total disaster. And then they have to make that choice of, should I even use this interview? Should I put it out into the world? So I think there are things that you can do to prepare your guests, especially from a sound quality standpoint, because people will turn off. You get a little more forgiveness with video and bad sound quality, but with audio, if the sound quality is bad, you're done. And they may not ever come back to your show. So you have to be very cognizant of that going into it. So tell your guest, hey, you need to be in a quiet room. If there are a lot of ambulances and big trucks driving by, maybe try to find a quieter space. If they have a walk-in closet at home, that is the ideal podcasting recording studio. The other thing that I've found, you see, here I go, kind of going off the rails, but at a minimum, don't let your guest use the built-in internal speaker or microphone on their computer, because they're going to sound so far away from you. And the beauty of podcasting is the intimacy and feeling like they're right in your ear, because we're right up on this microphone. So if at a minimum they're using earbuds, then tell them not to fidget with it, because it's distracting. Yes. Or don't let it get caught in their hair or scrape across their sweater, because it's distracting. Well, it's little things.
Yes. And probably the same, like you and I would find distracting jewelry. So you're going to have it from the sound piece, where I'm going to have it from many of my speakers will turn their rings or fidget with their necklace. I have been known to fidget with long necklaces. So I intentionally never wear a long necklace when I present, because I know by default my hand is going to twirl around that. And that's visually distracting for my audiences. So I like the fact that you say be mindful. I mean, that's a great tip for people to take away is here's a list. Really, if you're just starting off building a podcast, here's a list of the things that your guest should be aware of. So wear comfortable clothes, avoid distracting jewelry, everything that you said about the microphones and the speakers and the location of where you're going to do that. Man, preparation really is key to helping people get through bad behavior.
Exactly. And I think you also have to, kind of going back to the person that just wants to start selling right off the bat, if you let them know up front, hey, at the end, we're going to be able to share links to your book or your course. So we save that for the end, because we are going to get to that. You will be given an opportunity. And I feel like if they know that up front, then they are less likely to start pitching 10 seconds into the conversation.
Oh, that's a great point. That is a fantastic point. What do you do when, despite the fact that you have prepared someone in advance, they still come in and they're still doing bad behavior? Like they're argumentative, or they continue to sell even when you don't want them to sell. They're distracted. They're off topic. What do you do?
You can always take a pause. And see, I've learned that from you, Alex. Just take a pause.
Take a pause, take a break. The pause and a break are underrated in our world today.
I think you're so right about that. And try to reel them back in. Give them an opportunity to exhibit that good behavior, right? But if they continue down that path of either being a jerk or argumentative or just constantly pitching, you can always stop the interview. It's your show. Or if you get through it and you're like, that was a disaster, I'm not going to spend 5 hours editing this thing down to, 10 minutes of content that I can actually use, then don't put the episode out.
You remain in control. I love that you say that, because I tell speakers this all the time. Not that you can walk out of a speaking gig per se. However, that as a speaker, you do have control of the room and you're responsible for control of that room. So if the temperature's off, if I gave you this example earlier. I had a panelist, a woman who was sitting on a panel, and she had a plant next to her and she couldn't see the moderator, but she never moved the plant because she didn't feel like she had the permission as a speaker to block an obstruction or to move an obstruction. You absolutely have that right to do. And you should do that, not only for yourself, but for your audience.
Exactly.
Like we owe it to the people that are listening and or watching us to make the environment as conducive as possible to what's going on. And so my environment tends to be more physical, although noise is a part of it. So if there are ambient noises in an auditorium or a conference room, I have to do my best to try to control that. And same with your people. Don't wear Bangla bracelets.
Right. Exactly. That's it.
Or bang your foot underneath the table like perhaps I have done. More than once.
And I might be sitting in a squeaky chair, but you'll never hear it.
So we talked a lot about speaker bad behavior and or podcaster bad behavior, guest behavior. But what about audience bad behavior? Because I know one thing that my people are desperately afraid of, and that's a heckler or a distractor in an audience. The way I teach my people to handle that, there's 3 ways that we do this. So number 1 is you validate them. It's really hard to argue with someone who has validated your point. So for example, if you were telling me that hecklers are a positive thing and make you feel more challenged, I would say—
Free bird.
I would say, Jen, don't yell free bird, you can throw me off track. So, all right, Jen, I agree with you, free bird. And it's important to know how to handle a heckler when they come at you in a presentation, and you're going to talk about what a heckler looks like in your world, in the podcasting world. So that's one way to handle a heckler. If they continue to persist past that piece, you can do a couple of things. You can ask them to, hey, you're making great points, Jen. I really appreciate your thoughts. However, we're getting the audience off track. So come up and let's talk about this after the presentation. So then you've given that person the cue that, yes, I hear you, and your question is important to me. However, now is not the time, or your question or your statement, now is not the time. Let's talk about it afterwards. Maybe they'll take you up on it, and maybe they won't. You have to be ready for either scenario. More often than not, if their intent is to distract and take away from your message, they're not going to come up to you afterwards. Be ready if they do. The last thing that I tell people to do with a heckler is to ignore them. So if you have got someone who just won't let it go, no longer acknowledge them. And I mean, don't acknowledge them verbally, don't engage, move your body away from them, move your eye contact away from them, and make eye contact, ask a question to another person, launch into whatever next point you're going to make, and don't leave them the room to continue the heckling type of behavior.
Shut it down.
Shut it down. So, but I know in your world, like there's no one here to heckle us but the dog.
Right.
How do you coach podcasters to handle online heckling? Because we know that that's a real thing.
Yeah, I think it's just, the beauty of a podcast is I don't have a heckler here in the room with me.
I can heckle you.
But once you share your episode or your message and you get that out into the world, not everybody's going to agree with you. And, we've kind of talked about that before. That's fine too. You can, I think in social media, you can kind of do those things too, where, somebody sends you a nasty tweet. Well, you can acknowledge that and say, hey, maybe we should DM and have a conversation. Don't battle it out over Twitter, because we've kind of seen how that goes. Like, it's not a really good way to
not so
handle.
Good.
No. So you can validate people there, or you can just choose to ignore them. It's so much of what you've said.
Do you delete comments off of your postings, or unapprove them?
Yeah, because if it's not contributing to the conversation. Like if it's mean just to be mean, what good is that? And again, it's your stuff. It's your content. It's probably, your Facebook page, your YouTube channel, if you're sharing your podcast on YouTube, get rid of it. If it's not serving, if it's something constructive, I will absolutely leave it out there. If it's moving the conversation forward, but if it's not, what's the point? Who needs that in their life?
Agree. Is there anything that you would recommend a podcaster themselves not do?
As a host, you always want to make that guest feel really special. Like this is a big deal to come on your show. So make sure that you are communicating with them. Make sure you've got their latest headshot. You've got their most current bio. You can check with them in kind of the pre-interview conversation. Hey, this is the bio that I'm going to share. Has anything changed? Do I need to update anything? And make sure that you are always presenting them in the best light, like the rock star that they are. They're on your show for a reason. So make them feel like they're special, like this is important, this is a thing. And then when your episode with them airs, send them the links, promote it on social media. Some clients use audiograms to promote episodes. So send that to them so that they at least have that opportunity to share your show with their people as well. But set your guest up for success.
So bad behavior would be to leaving your guest out to dry.
Exactly.
Don't leave people out to dry.
And be respectful of their time. If you've said, hey, we're going to do this and it's going to take about 30 minutes, then honor that. If you guys are having this really great conversation at about 28 minutes, then say, hey, I want to be respectful of your time. If you've got time and continue, great, but be respectful of their time.
Well said. That word goes for speakers too. Be respectful of the audience's time. We covered some good stuff in this episode today.
We did.
Of all the things. So to wrap up, we know that we have got to plan. Planning helps prevent bad behavior. So planning for yourself and planning for your guest, preparing your guest well to be on your podcast. We talked about getting rid of I behavior and redirecting someone out of the I and into more inclusive language that's going to help reduce that sort of salesy feel that we can get sometimes when someone shows up on a podcast and is excited about sharing and or selling their stuff. And then the last thing we talked about was owning your space, that ultimately it's your podcast. The decisions are yours to make, and it's okay to set limits, to set boundaries around that, and to say no when things are not going your way.
That's it.
So
right there.
No bad behavior exhibited on this podcast
None.
Today. None. You were very well-behaved host.
Thank you. You were a very well-behaved guest, Alex.
Fantastic.
Share this podcast with a friend that you think could benefit from listening to it. Do not bogart this wisdom. Share it out with the world. And we would love to hear from you on LinkedIn. You can connect with us there. I'm on LinkedIn at Jen Eads, JENEDDS. Feel free to share this podcast there and tell us what one of your takeaways was from it. We would love to continue the conversation.
# all the things.
And Alex, how can they connect with you?
Same thing. LinkedIn. It's Alexandra Raffato. RU Fat 2. RU F as in Frank. ATTO-Perry. Also, # PS with Alex. You can find me on LinkedIn. Connect with me there. I'd love to see you.
Thanks for listening. Now get out in the world and do some good.
But what if that's not nice, Jen and Alex? No. I used to do Cartman all the time. No, Kitty, that's my 5-5. Yeah, oh yeah.